I disappear, talk. Okay.
Okay. Greetings, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us today. I am your host. My name is Dieketseng Nibe, founder and CEO of United Siyafunda. I am so excited today that you are going to be part of this webinar. So over the past 4 years, our organization has been dedicated to bridging the gap between those who have access to technology and those who do not. Our mission is to empower minds and bridge futures. So one of the most inspiring observations on the ground has been the enthusiasm for African educators when exposed to AI, coding, robotics, and AI tools. The excitement is evident, but there's a significant challenge that still remains: the lack of foundational skills to engage with these technologies. The key obstacle is not just learning how to use AI tools, but adapting to computing itself and developing the confidence to share this knowledge with the learners. The release of the South Africa's coding and robotics curriculum is a very promising step. However, the reality is that many schools still lack the infrastructure and the resources necessary to implement it effectively. This stark contrast highlights how far we are from meeting global education standards in technology integration. With that being said, we've introduced the AI webinars simply for information sharing so that all our educators all around Africa and in the world can engage on exciting topics that will allow us to unpack a whole lot of technology tools, AI, and everything else. With that being said, we have our very own dedicated moderator for today, who is going to be able to lead the session. Please allow me to welcome Karen Walstra to be able to engage, and I hope you will enjoy the webinar. Karen, welcome, Karen, and over to you.
So, hi, everybody. There are 3 of us this evening who are going to have this discussion, and hopefully Keke will kick in at times as well. So thank you for joining us. So I'd like Graham and David to introduce themselves and tell us a little bit about their aspects. So from my point of view, I work with schools on educational change. And from an AI point of view, I look at how do we use AI within the schools from a teacher point of view. How do we look at it from an ethics and a responsible point of view? And how do we create policies around that within schools to really think about how do we become responsible AI digital citizens? Graham, over to you.
Good evening. So my name's Graham Hastings. I'm still a full-time teacher after many years teaching computer science. Recently, I've joined a charity called Teach the Teacher, and we're providing, I suppose, free consultancy in Africa to help them to make use of technologies such as Starlink and cloud computing to level up education with that I experience in my school and schools in the sort of the wealthy global north. So we've been working in some of the poorer countries like the Gambia. Out of that work, I got invited to join with United Siyafunda to look at how to implement coding and robotics in South Africa. And so that's another thing I'm working on. But AI has hit us like a bolt from the blue. Schools are struggling to work out how to handle AI, because whether they like it or not, the pupils will use it. So we've got to deal with it.
That's true. That's true. Thanks, Graham. David, over to you.
Hi there, everyone. Down here in Cape Town, so same Middle Earth time zone as Graham, but the other side of the equation. I came from the other side. I came deeply from the technology side, 20 years as a technologist, and then I've been growing into the charitable side, starting code clubs. So for the last 12, 13 years, I've been helping to start code clubs with young people aged 7 to 17 and seeing how we can embrace technology for them. Today, we've got over 250 clubs that we help support here in the Western Cape and the Eastern Cape. And those clubs then in turn are helping to support the teachers that are trying to do this curriculum work that KK mentioned. So it's a super interesting place to be in. AI is really cool. We had over 100 projects coming into the global showcase that young people were using AI in coolest projects. That's out of a few thousand. I think it's about 5,000 projects. So still a small number of them explicitly used AI. But yeah, it's really exciting. And I think it's a bit of a leapfrog technology like mobile phones because it's really accessible. And that's what's really exciting to me about it is you don't need complicated setups to use AI.
So we're going to look at 3 main questions this evening. And if you've got input that you want to put in or pop questions in, please do so. Then we'll elaborate or try and share on those if we can address them. So the first question that we're going to look at is, I just want to see that it's sharing. Are African educators embracing AI in education? And so for me, I think this is a yes and a no answer, because I think it really depends on where you're sitting as a teacher within that space. For one, in Africa, we have these huge challenges around us. There is a lack of digital infrastructure. There's often a lack of teacher training. There's this huge digital divide where people have access and lots of people don't have access. There are also the ethical concerns around AI, and are people just jumping in without an awareness and knowledge of it? And what about the relevance of AI tools within the African context as well? So there are a range of these negative things. But on the other side, there are a huge range of positive things that we're seeing. So in Kenya, we're seeing African schools being geared up for the AI revolution. And there's a range of different applications and things that we're seeing how schools are being empowered in that point of view. If we look at it from what big edtech companies are doing, Google's invested 50 million in AI literacy training for African educators, and they're estimating reaching 100,000 teachers across 10 different countries in Africa. HPAI Teacher Academy helps teachers understand AI literacy and ethics, and Stellenbosch University offers an AI course. So there are a range of different things that are trying to get teachers to be empowered. From a South African point of view, there was the basic education Lekgotla that took place earlier this year. And the third session of the Lekgotla focused on artificial intelligence. And Professor Isaacs spoke about how AI is a highly contested space. And the call is for ensuring an ethical, inclusive, sustainable, equitable, human rights-based, human-centered approach and agency towards public good use in these technologies. And the discussion there was really interesting, and David will elaborate a bit more on that. And Dr. Tarling led a panel discussion in terms of how AI tools can really drive and look at data privacy and security, but also used within the education space, and see how we can change from that point of view. So for me, looking at education and saying, how do we meet this question around, are teachers using artificial intelligence? I think it varies. So I'm not sure, Graham, what are your thoughts around that from a African point of view? What have you seen or heard of?
So I can speak a little bit for the Gambia. There was great enthusiasm once the word got around that AI was something that anybody could engage with, and there was an eagerness to use it, but there were barriers. Barriers really were mainly to do with the technology and the lack of it in schools. So it's a simple fact that if you don't have live access to the internet, then it makes it very difficult for you to use generative AI like ChatGPT. It's free and it's available to everybody, but you've got to have access to the internet. And then the other problem in the Gambia was that data is very expensive. People, use their data very carefully. And if you're going to run a prompt on AI to produce a document, and it needs a lot of iterations and refining, it eats up a lot of your data. So that's the first barrier. The second barrier was there weren't many people who knew much about it who could give advice and training. And that's true everywhere. Every country in the world has been hit with that problem. Schools haven't got teachers who've been trained on this, and therefore they're struggling to work things out for themselves. I happen to be, because I'm a computer science teacher, I was given the tasks of learning about AI and training the teachers. And so I'm sort of self-taught. And then I had to teach the teachers how to teach the children. And so there was a massive knowledge gap. It's slowly being filled by research and findings and documentation. But those were the main problems. And I still think they largely exist today. It's sort of catching up, really.
Yeah, I think that's very true. And I think over time we're going to see the change. I think there is a flood of things happening and sort of, I think it is evolving, but I think it's really a space to keep an eye on to see what's going to happen. David, what are your thoughts around this?
So I think we're quite different from the Gambia, quite fortunately. And I think I'm always Mr. Silver Linings. Everybody will always take that from me. So I think the one thing that's quite remarkable being part of a global community of code clubs is we look at other countries like Australia, where the education department has put a ban on AI. You can't use it in the classroom, you can't do it in tests, you can't even, it's blocked everywhere. So any form of exploring of AI, that's a huge barrier. So not having that, and instead having a stance where we're looking at how we can use this technology is already an enabling environment for our teachers. They're not being told not to use it. We're rather wondering, how do we use it? The other big thing in South Africa is the main way that I would contact a teacher is over WhatsApp. It's better than email. It's better than anything else. And so from an access point of view, I've got a good confidence that most teachers have access to WhatsApp, at least at some points in the day, which from being able to use AI point of view, we can use Meta's AI for free with a WhatsApp phone. And if we know how to WhatsApp to chat to a friend, we know how to WhatsApp to talk to an LLM. And I think that's the amazing thing about this technology is it's a great leap forward in human-computer interaction. Graham and I are both computer scientists, and we've gone through the painful process in the 80s of learning how to deal with a computer, learning how to talk to a computer. Now you just open it up and you say hi, and it's like, hello, what would you like to do today? And no one had to script that menu. It can really engage with us. So that fascinates me. And are African educators using it? Is the question. Definitely yes is the answer. The question is how many. I don't think we've got a really good baseline of how much usage it's having. As an African educator, it's definitely useful. It's definitely landing. Code clubs are doing it. We've got code club projects. There's also, KK mentioned earlier, the Google investment in this. Together with the Raspberry Pi Foundation, Google DeepMind has put together Experience AI, which actually came out when AI was still hard, to be honest. So this was before LLMs had exploded, when AI was image recognition, when AI was starting with language models. And there are a set of videos that educators are already using in our context, and that's rolling out with partners. Also, there's sponsorship going out to actually get partners to train educators how to use those 6 classroom modules into the classroom, which really get us into how does AI really work, which I think is the important thing from a learner perspective, enabling them to use the technology, is when you laugh at it and you see how wrong it is when you try to train it what a tomato or an orange or banana is, because I haven't trained it with that data, we start to realize that it's not magic. And we stop anthropomorphizing it, believing it as smart as a human. it's the same old garbage in, garbage out problem, which points to the problem you spoke about bias. What garbage is in there and what comes out. So I think that's interesting. I mean, most people that I engage with in the Code Club context are further along on the technology adoption lifecycle. Most of them have, as educators, used and experimented with AI in some way. So that's kind of the answer to that question for me. And a recent survey in the UK, I think the Raspberry Pi Foundation just was sharing research on a recent call. I think it was 67% of young people felt confident in using AI to do things. You know, they mentioned having successfully used an AI technology. There was a comment about AI being intimidating, and I think it's scary when we haven't used it, but when we play, it becomes interesting. And I think that's the thing. How do we play with the AI and make it safe? And play is the core thing. Graham's raising a hand there.
Yeah, Graham, what are your thoughts? You muted, sorry.
One of the things that schools need to understand about AI is that there are 3 strands to the use of AI in schools, and they need to be separated out and dealt with individually. So there's AI for teacher admin. So this is teachers using AI to help them to lesson plan, prepare schemes of work, mark work, etc., write reports. Then there's AI literacy. So this is children learning how to use AI for learning. So learning across the curriculum using AI. And the third strand is the strand that I would teach, but doesn't have to be just computer science teachers, but it's teaching about AI. So how it works, the sort of nuts and bolts of AI. But within that, you would also be teaching about ethics, responsible use, etc. And that can be shared out across the curriculum amongst other subjects. So if you're talking about, the ethics of using images to produce artwork, that would be something that the art teacher would be best to educate the children about. And so that sort of thing can be spread across the curriculum. But AI is not just one thing, it's several things. And in the education context, most people would tend to divide it into those 3 strands and deal with them individually.
I agree with you. And I think that's really where we should be at. So I just want to share another slide quickly. So for me, an interesting thing that I learned about this week too was looking at what Burkina Faso is doing. So how they are actually looking at empowering their teachers, but across the board, first in digital skills and then going into AI. And I think that's sort of the kind of thing here where we've got teachers who are really afraid of artificial intelligence. They themselves, as David was saying, haven't played. And I think we should be playing with the technology, and it should be all teachers, not just teachers who can see. So for example, their inclusion in Burkina Faso was really focused on how do we include all our teachers into the space, with this really amazing photo from the UNESCO report talking about or showing the teachers who are blind. And I think that's what we really need to say, is how do we include everybody and remove the fear? Because I think lots of the tech kind of things around us happen because of fear. And so how do we take away that fear and show them, hey, play with us, have a look, see how it can help you, and start with the little things within that space. KK, what would you like to add?
I think it's a very important point, and it's good what Burkina Faso is doing, really. My main issue is on the adoption of this AI technology, and I'm coming from a perspective of working with educators on the ground. We've got different types of educators. I'm going to talk about the BBT, maybe born before technology. So we find situations where they're not really interested in learning new skills because they're already on their way out. So it becomes very more challenging to engage with them on these specific skills that they need to learn to teach our learners. The second part, which we cannot avoid, it's definitely what has been mentioned, the lack of the tools. It's good that, Burkina Faso's approach, something that we could learn probably is to say, let's equip our educators with the resources and then be able to then teach them. I'm coming from a perspective where you talk about artificial intelligence. Already there's a language barrier, because you must understand that the terminology that is used within the context of these topics, it's new words that now, as an educator as well, you need to adapt. So I'm bringing all the challenges and hoping you could help unpack, useful ways to combat these challenges. Thank you, Karen.
Yeah, and I think that the kinds of suggestions that have already been there can help unpack. So getting people to play. I must say, KK, my instance in terms of training has almost been the opposite, where the older teachers have actually engaged the things more than even some of the younger teachers. So I really think it depends on group to group and group of people. So I've seen a range of different teachers in terms of really embracing it and seeing how it's been of benefit to them and use them within the space. Graham, over to you.
So this is my job, is to actually get teachers to use artificial intelligence. And the way I do it is actually I pick the low-hanging fruit. So what is it that teachers would really like to be able to do? And in my school, it's always report writing. Report writing is the biggest chore that we have. Report writing and marking work. So I say to them, I don't say to them, look, you need to use AI or we're going to learn about AI. I say, look, your reports can be written for you. And it's a very, very simple computer-based system. And all you need to do is to do this. And I show them a simple way to get AI to write their reports. And they learn how to get their reports written by a computer. You don't need to mention artificial intelligence. You just say, this is a system that will write your reports for you. Or this is a system that will mark your students' work for you. And they think this is absolutely fantastic. Obviously, they work out that it's using AI of some sort. They've heard of ChatGPT and generative AI. But you introduce them to a system that will write their reports for them, that will save them a great deal of time. And they love that. And then you've got them hooked.
Yeah, that's very, very true. In terms of this question, David, is there something you'd like to end off with, or Graham, that you'd like to end off with?
Well, just similar to what Graham was saying there. What are those first delightful experiences that show you that things can happen differently? One of my favorite experiences with teachers and children is to do like an interactive story creation, because that's something we've never done before. And, where if you've heard me talk before, I always mention it, but it's saying, okay, well, let's tell a story about, and you give the child's name. Where do they live? And we give the name of where they live. And what happens? They find this. And is it hurt or is it lost? And what's the crisis and how do they resolve it? And tell me that story. And then you say, now, and this is part of teaching the ocean model of AI. We say, okay, what's the context? These are 8th graders and they need to learn about friction and angles. So incorporate how our hero uses those to save the bunny. And suddenly you get the story pouring out, which you can read. And that really shows the magic of a generative AI making something that didn't exist before. And yeah, so for me, it is connecting with that magic moment. Graham's like, let's get rid of the pain. The pragmatic thing is to be a painkiller, not a vitamin. But for me, like maybe it's a little better than a vitamin. Maybe it's a tasty fruit. Yeah.
David, I want to say we did do creative storytelling and we used to use slides, but not with the AI. And it was a lot of fun. And getting the children to do that, and each one adds to the story as you're going through. So yes, using those,
using an AI now.
Yeah. So using these kinds of tools that just show teachers how you can make it. Foundation phase teachers are always looking for pictures, and you can't always find pictures for your lessons. So showing them how you can put in a topic that you're wanting to teach, and it can create an image for you that you just can't find, or it's completely copyrighted that you can't use, that they can now create a picture and add a tag at the bottom of where they've created it and not feel bad to be putting it into their worksheets or things like that. As you're saying, find the low-hanging fruit and show teachers how it can save them time, how it can make their lessons more fun, and then how their kids can be really engaging with it. So, Keke, is there anything you would like to add in terms of this question before we move on?
No, definitely I can testify to that beautiful moment when an educator discovers for the first time how to use an AI tool that simplifies their days or their career. It's learning how to use AI and generating lesson plans and all of that. I've seen the smiles on their faces, and I know right now they're hoping to gain some tools in order to be able to mark the learners' assessments and all of that. So it's really interesting when they discover for the first time that actually I had this app on my phone. I didn't realize that I could use it and be able to effectively do my job. So yeah, no, we're definitely getting there.
Yeah, we are. So I think it's one step at a time, and I think it's how do we engage with the teachers and really show them that, hey, there's this tech, and let's see how we can actually use it. So if we think about that now, and we've spoken about what a teacher's like, do you think we need AI solutions designed specifically for Africa? And in my instance, I'm saying there's a yes and there's a no, because I think there are some really great international resources like Raspberry Pi, and the lessons they've got there. One of the AI tools that I've loved for years is Google's Read Along, and they made it African. It came from India, and they employed African authors where the children can read the story aloud and the AI listens. So I really think that being relevant is important, and it also then makes it more accessible for the children. So I went and looked for some examples around Africa of what we are seeing. So we're seeing that there in Kenya, there are a range of platforms that are being developed. So for example, there's Mshalu, which is a lessons AI development tool, but it's all through SMSs in Kenya to really get access to children. And it's an adaptive learning tool, even though it's through SMS. And Enza Education, what they are doing is they've made their lessons really personalized learning. So the adaptive course then really grows within the children. And Enza is also used within South Africa. And then in Nigeria, we're seeing platforms such as a tutoring platform. So we've got Lagos State that's deploying an AI tutor across public schools. And these kinds of things are also being used to really show how artificial intelligence isn't just staying in the corporate space, but how it's working within our spaces. Then from a South African point of view, we've got a few. So Amira is from the Chase Education Solutions, and they've developed a tool which is similar to, I suppose, what Read Along is, also where the children speak and listen, and they then develop the resources. Zaro has got an AI platform where they teach a range of different skills, including artificial intelligence, but upskilling young people in all sorts of digital tools. And then the Fundament looks at a startup where what they're doing there is they're actually using WhatsApp to teach children and help the education gaps. And then one of my favorites is Marking AI, which is a South African product, which actually then where teachers go in and create their assessments, upload it, and it marks even handwritten work. So the teachers can actually submit the handwritten submissions of the students, and it will mark it. And it's designed not so much for maths and science, but it's designed for the subjects where teachers have got real huge marking loads. So for languages and for history and for geography, where you're marking essays and things, it's designed to mark those kinds of resources. So for me, those are some examples. And then I was assuming David was going to speak about all the other ones that he's involved in, so I didn't put them in. But there are some really great African resources that I think that we really need to be saying, yes, we do need African, but I think we need to embrace what's around the globe and see what fits best for us, because I think we should always make choices within that space. So David, over to you.
Cool. I mean, there is a lot of ground to cover. I think that, like Graham earlier unwound some of the strands. I think the first part is to think that there's two parts to what an AI solution is. There's effectively the engine, and then there's how we train it and what we put on the front. So there's like the model and the experience of it, and then there's the core engine. This astounding thing is that when you use something like Meta's AI or ChatGPT, you're getting like billions of dollars of technology research for free, because there's currently a race to get market share, to get more people to use it, to be the leading tool. So at the moment, we're in a really fun place where you can use all of this stuff for low cost or no cost. That's not going to last forever. And that's, I think, one of the big challenges is people building business models on the basis that, oh, I can get this service and use that API. Once there's the lock-in, we've seen that in all of the other technology cycles, then the profit taking starts. And so many of these tools are being built in the open. And at the moment, using the engines that exist is pragmatic to learn about it. When we think about what it would mean to be independent of a mega corporate's infrastructure, that's an interesting and challenging question. But luckily, the answer is not too hard. One can take, so in offline classrooms, you can take a something as small as a Raspberry Pi 5 computer, run Olama on it, and have a chat model that you can talk to with no internet connection.
Yeah.
And that's quite surprising to most people, because we assume you have to have these massive servers and people talk about how much energy is used. But you can actually run it offline on a model that you can host yourself, you can talk to it. It's not as fast, it doesn't have all the plugins, but it has freedom. So I think that's important on the one hand. And then in terms of the engine side, being able to make sure we keep that free and unencumbered. The other side is looking at the training and the user interfaces. So I think this is where some of the examples that were given, like here is an AI. We maybe haven't made an AI, we've made a model, we've trained a model, we've given it a context, and we've given a different user interface to make it locally relevant, which is great. You mentioned Nigerian tutoring. Our commercial software company I'm involved in has helped build some of those a few years ago. They're quite cool. And then Lalapa AI and the Masakani community are doing the other really hard work, which is building a corpus of African languages for natural language programming, natural language translation. And those ultimately are going to create a world in which one can communicate in the mother tongue with that level of fluency, which I think also, especially for our younger learners, is super important. But for older people, my age, Graham's age included, even if we're technologists, I've done work translating Python's turtle into Xhosa isiZulu. There's something amazing about importing fudo instead of turtle and making it ampili ekuhlu, and that I've spoken to a computer and it's responded in a language of my own. And isiXhosa, you'd say, we don't have to speak isiNgesi to be smart, right? isiNgesi is this language of the English. We don't have to be English to be smart. And there's this process of realizing that this is actually relevant to me and this can actually make sense. And that's also one of the things that I think was really, really hard before, and AI makes it a lot easier. At the moment, we don't see it with languages, but we can see it with cultural references. I talked earlier, where was the little person on their adventure? They could be in a South African city. So we're not reading books about children exploring London, which is most of the books. They can be local. And the next part is putting their context in. What sort of music do you like? How much more does a young person come alive when I saw a comment by Jude on the side there, Romeo and Juliet, right? When I do Scratch, I love to say to the English educators, make Romeo and Juliet on the balcony. Jude's talking about the fact that Romeo can ask Juliet what it was like. The first time you prompt that, you might get responses in Shakespearean English. You could say, hey, how about translating that to Taylor Swift lyrics? And now suddenly the whole context and accessibility is super interesting. And have Eminem talking to Taylor Swift, just see what's happening, bring it in. Those examples are maybe even too old for our generation, but like what would be interesting? How do we bring it locally relevant? Is already visible there as the corpus starts to include more relevant African examples. The concept of trying to translate a physics textbook to not be Eurocentric was really hard, but the thoughts of doing that with large language models is a lot more tractable. So I think it's a big space. There's lots of work to do. We need to stay vigilant, but I'm very positive. And the core model is mathematical. So one doesn't need to go and spend billions rebuilding those core models. They're mathematical and open source, and that's universal language. So I think that's it for me.
Yeah.
Bit of a soapbox.
I saw a brilliant tool, which I think is really great. It's an American developed tool. It's called Boodlebox, but it's an AI tool which they've actually developed for collaboration and translation. So the young man in the US is actually helping startups in Johannesburg and in Kenya, but then he speaks in English and it translates it into Zulu or into Sotho. So everybody's speaking in their own languages, and then you've got the translation of coming through. So the AI is pulling up the languages, learning more from about the languages as people are speaking them. And those are the kinds of tools which can really then change the way we teach, where you engaging in critical thinking in a space and using the AI just as another sort of collaborator. So you're collaborating with people and AI in the same tool, which is a really phenomenal kind of experience to be involved in, where you're talking to each other and looking at the AI responses, asking the AI for feedback, and then people are commenting on that and pulling that apart. And so a different way of how we engage. So a bit like your storytelling, but everybody in the same global kind of space. Graham, before we come to you, I just want to go to Jude's other comment. So she's saying perhaps schools and educators, to truly embrace the use of AI and its benefits, we need them to think differently. AI can't be taught in the IT lessons in a week. It can't be taught by the teachers aren't learning alongside the learners, thinking that they need to be experts. Teachers should be given permission and help to start having conversations in class with their students. It's not just about using AI in preparing lessons, because the learners are going. And so I really think that's important. And for me, I suppose, I haven't just thought about this in terms of AI. I've always thought about it in terms of teaching. It's having the conversations with the children, talking to them about internet safety and why that we're not trying to be difficult. This is what the good and the bad are. Just like you talk to your children about the good and bad of stranger danger, just about the good and bad of everything. And the same goes for the use of tools. I can remember sitting in a classroom where there was an update on like software, and you've used the tool, and then I've said to the kids, okay guys, I know we used this last week, where is it now? And getting them to realize that you don't have to know all the answers, and you can have these conversations. And I think that's what's important. So thanks, Jude. I think that's really great. I don't know if anybody wants to comment on this before we go on to Graham's views around the tech. Yeah, David.
Well, so Yes, I mean, the thing is that is all true, and that is what teachers are doing, and those teachers are finding their own way through it, are doing it. Again, I think, though, it is important to split it into the three strands. But I think so a lot of this is kind of looking at the micro of AI in schools. Actually, this is a massive thing, absolutely massive. The whole way we educate children is about to change, and it's about to change in an enormous way. So we built a system in my school, and going back to the original question, so yes, Africa has to have its own data. They can use ChatGPT, we can all use the same model, doesn't matter what we use, but you have to have your own data. So you have to train it with data that matches your context. It also has to be age appropriate. So you have to make the data age appropriate. So we created a system. It was a physical server. We trained it on our curriculum. Okay. So it knew what the children needed to know. We made it age appropriate. It was aimed at under 13s. So it spoke like a 10-year-old and a 12-year-old, or a 12-year-old, 10 to 12-year-old, aimed at that. And it would answer questions using their language in their way. It was very friendly. It wanted them to be polite. So if they didn't say please and thank you, it reminded them to say please and thank you. So it's the data that's really important, making it age appropriate, school appropriate. But this is a job for governments. So the Department for Education in the UK, they understand, that's just dawning on them, that they are going to have to spend a vast amount of money because they have to produce AI system appropriate for UK schools. It has to have the UK national curriculum in it. It has to know that. It has to know the age of the children. It has to warn the children when they're doing something that's not safe. It has to be, completely child-friendly, but also child-safe. It has to take care of data. It has to know about the general data protection legislation, all these things. It has to do all that. Now, governments are going to be spending a great deal of money producing these things so that teachers aren't going to have to buy things, schools aren't going to have to buy things. It is so important and so vital to education that it's the job of governments. Now, I don't know where the government in South Africa are along this journey. I've just seen a paper here that the Department for Education in the UK have just invested £3 million on, which is not very much, it's peanuts, but on a pilot to get some training of a system for use in UK schools. But yes, I mean, you cannot overstate how schools and schooling is about to change, and it will change very quickly in the next 3 to 5 years, because my pupils are already doing it and they're demanding it. So we can't deny it because they're going to do it anyway.
Yeah, so I agree with you completely there, and I think as teachers we've got to think differently. In terms of how we're teaching, extremely differently. And I suppose what we are seeing here in South Africa is teachers moaning because children are using artificial intelligence for assignments and they're accepting them. So some schools are banning it, and some schools are sort of saying, what's the issue in terms of how do we change? And I think we've really got to think very differently, and we've got to teach children to be analytical and critical in terms of how they address this. We've got to teach the children to think. If we look at lots of our assessments, we're still on the knowledge and recall band. And for years, we've been saying we've got to get up into higher order thinking. Yeah, yes. And it's saying now we've really got to, because the AI is doing that. David, sorry, you popped up your hand.
Well, no, it's just to emphasize that. In my school, I am seeing, this is absolutely fact, I am seeing work that was set by AI, which was then done by AI, which was then marked by AI. And those marks were then recorded on school reports and sent home to parents. Nobody had done anything except the AI. Literally, some teacher had got the AI to write an assessment. They'd given it to the pupils. The pupils had given it to AI to do the assessment. They'd given it back to the teachers. The teachers had used AI to mark it, and they put a grade on a mark book. And that's where we are. It's incredible. It's astonishing, but that's where education is at the moment.
And for me, I suppose my fear, so not looking at the silver lining, David, the opposite, is saying, if we don't change the way we think, are we going to end up with our children thinking we can just talk to the AI? The AI will give us, we won't even have to read. So will we be saying children won't be reading? Will we be saying children won't be thinking analytically? They'll just trust these AI tools for what the answer is. So we've got to be teaching them how to be analytical. We've got to be getting them to question, getting them to validate. So we have to change the way we teach.
Yes.
And really think about that, really from a concrete point of view, both online and offline, how are we teaching differently? So David, you've put up your hand twice and we've closed yours.
No.
Sorry.
You guys are definitely covering the points anyway. I'm just getting excited. I think it's something new. And I think the best part about something new, it's not the first time we've had something new. And it's useful to go back and look at what happened with the something's new and what we need to do about it pedagogically and culturally. So I remember sitting in the computer lab the first day that Google was officially announced that Google was going to be a better search engine. And in those days, it was hard to find information on the internet. And I'd grown up with a dad who, anytime, I asked a question, I'm never sure whether he really knew the answer or not, but he'd say, oh, let's look it up in the encyclopedia. And, we'd go and look it up. And so when Google came up, people were like, oh, it's going to stop us knowing how to do research, and kids will just get the answers. And sure enough, they did, got a Google answer. You posted it and teacher thought you were smart because you were ahead on Google. And that was after I was in school, so I didn't get to experience that. But I mean, we saw that happening, and we've learned to work with Google. People understand how we can work with such a crazy distributed anarchistic tool like Wikipedia, where no one has a handhold on the truth. So I mean, it's not like we won't figure it out. It's just more powerful and going to happen faster. And there's an even older technology that I think is more instructive when we think about AI in terms of competencies, and that's the pocket calculator. Yeah. And why can't I just use a pocket calculator to do all of this maths? And I think most of us in the room and on the stream will have come around to the fact that just using the pocket calculator to do the math means we don't develop the mental muscle around the arithmetic. It's like, why can't I use a chess trainer to play chess? Because I won't see that next pattern. So there is a process like we've been talking about training artificial intelligences that we actually need to go through training our human intelligence and loading our own neural networks in a way that we build that intuition. And that I think is super important as another strand almost in educating young people as we start to educate is how do we need to learn. And that's been changing already. When I first started my code club, which was 13 years ago now, I made the mistake of standing in front of a group full of children with computers and asking them, I remember this very clearly, it was the one time I went to a whiteboard and I said, how many transistors do we think are in the CPU up here? I was like, take a guess. And they almost bodily could not. They had to Google it. They were like, the one was under the table with the laptop and the phone here and the thing. They were just like, I can find out the answer. Why would you make me guess? And realizing that there's this different pathway to hearing a question, going and collecting answers, which are then different, being critical about them, and then making up your mind through using what in the 90s we would say maybe we'll be able to extend our prefrontal cortex into the internet, and it'll come up with answers and then we'll feed that back into our brain. Well, that's what we're seeing happening, and now we need to learn how to use it. That's challenging and fascinating, but it very much is like, why can't I use an AI to come up with the structure for my speech? Because then I'm not building my own competencies. So we get to these competency and capability-based models that we need to start thinking about. companies like OpenEdX have been doing that in the adult education space for a while, moving from number of hours spent and things put into capability-based assessments. And how do we assess in a way that looks at that and also looks at using the tools? That's a really going to be a new and hard space. MIT's lifelong kindergarten lab has been exploring this topic under creative learning, right? So, and they've got this course called Learning Creative Learning, because when we want to learn coding, and I think this gets back to AI is almost a form of coding. It is a creative process, similar to wanting to teach art. We don't we can't use traditional education for art. We can't use traditional education, like traditional, when I talk about traditional, I mean retrieval education. There's no value in knowing all of the chiaroscuro techniques without having done them and then choosing the right one in the moment. And so I think taking that idea of how can we get those ingredients, which is, you've got your 4 P's of creative learning from is projects, passion, peers, and play. We've been talking a bit about passion, getting the right context in that connects to our passion. We've been talking about like peers, we've been talking about playfulness, but all of that sits in a massive shift in how we think about education. I think that's the hard part. Someone made a point about it not being the deliverer of information. The young people put the information into their head and then retrieve it back and get marked for doing that. There is still a legacy of a school system that's designed to make components for that machine that doesn't exist anymore. So that's what's quite interesting to me.
Yeah, that's very true. KK, is there anything you'd like to add?
I think let's take it back to should we have AI designed for Africans, or designed for Africa? That is the real question. And I'm sitting and thinking, is Africa even ready for AI? So I'm finding it very difficult to answer this question, because I would like to look at it from a governance perspective to start it off there. Do we have, policies around that? Has there been any white paper written around AI? Now, this is so much of a confusion when you have to now filter into education, because you're sitting and thinking schools need to have AI policies. But who then drafts those policies when they don't even understand what AI is and its capabilities? There's so many wonderful tools that were mentioned earlier, designed by Africans, and some of them which I got to learn about. And honestly, the Raspberry Pi has also taught me a lot in terms of being able to learn how to train a model. The example of the tomatoes and apples, but it goes so deep. Because I'm sitting and thinking, it was very interesting to having to do that for the first time and doing it with the learners. Now we've got grammars in the UK as a school, they're able to come up with a solution where they're also able to come up with the engine to actually a model that helps them. But I'm sitting and thinking, there's that educator that is sitting there and saying, what are they even talking about? Because we can't even type at this moment. We don't even have a computer lab, the infrastructure. Where there has been information and there's been skills which has been transferred, now we've got a costing issue. Like you talk about the opening AI. So now I'm coming from a perspective of young innovators or innovators that come up with these solutions. You would find that most that have these skills, they commercialize, and they're very rare to find, because now it's an opportunity to make money. David touched on that earlier on to say he could predict more or less what could happen when they close up the OpenAI app, and now we all need to pay for those solutions. So it's to monetize. I've got a very wonderful app, Nubian Smarts, that we've been using, and it's a clear example of an app that crashed, and now you have to find developers that could help develop a new solution, and it's costing a lot. So is it a matter of Africans not having the access to information in order to become inventors as opposed to consumers of these products? Or is it a matter of Africa as a whole, there's limited infrastructure, because even our hosting, it goes somewhere else. Those are a few things that I need clarity on for me to even understand whether we need to be developing AI solutions for Africa, because I understand from a context of language, it helps with the language barrier, relatable material. But now I'm just taking it deep and would like to hear your thoughts, David, on this.
It looks like I'm going to be saved by the bell, but I think for some reason, what comes to mind is the classic example that South Africa was the first country in the world to have electric lights in a city. That was Kimberley.
Yes,
it is a leapfrog technology. Where we missed out on certain things before, it's easier to go with. So that Africa is better on mobile technologies as well in general because of the lack of the first wave rollout, the incumbents that were there. And AI is a phenomenally, and if in particular LLMs, because that's really what we talk about when we talk about AI, but I like to be specific. So the chat-based interface with a computer that understands context is a huge improvement in human-computer interface. It makes it a lot easier to interact with the computer and to get things done. And when we see the new things coming out with MCP, where Model Context Protocol, that can actually better allow our AI to make changes in the digital and then physical world, I think that's going to be something to take advantage of, that almost levels the playing field. You asked about where the infrastructure is hosted and how that goes. Look, I think that's going to be a question of going forwards. Someone was mentioning there that AI will be used to draft the policies. Well, almost definitely is being used to draft the policies. Is that a mistake? I don't know. But
if we analyze it and if we read it critically and if we agree that we don't just say, yes, that's right, that's where human in the loop becomes so important. So not just saying, yes, the AI is right.
It's the critical thinking. And we do have examples from some of the single party owned AIs out there injecting propaganda. So we that very explicitly has happened, and it would also happen implicitly. So the knowledge of how controlling the thing that actually generates a lot of our ongoing narrative goes, that's really important to know. How are we controlling the tool? Who is controlling the tools? But yeah, through the power of open source, it is possible to host your own models. One of the products that our commercial company AfroLabs has brought live with a partner in the US allows anybody to spin up, if they for legislative reasons are not allowed their data to leave their country, to spin up their own light LLM in front of all the other different LLMs, whether you're hosting it on Google or Amazon or Microsoft, your own vector database, serve your own data out of your own infrastructure. And at the moment, with today's rates, that's costing cents per query. So it's not very expensive to run that sort of infrastructure today. If that gets 10 times more expensive, it's still not prohibitive. We might not ask AI like what it thinks of my idea about going out for lunch today if we're paying rands for it rather than cents for it. But the genie's out of the bottle there, and how do we actually use it is the question.
So, Keke, in terms of what you've said, from a South African point of view, we do have a draft policy framework in terms of AI, and there have been a range of round tables around it. So from a government point of view, they are looking at it from a digital communications and technologies point of view. And there, as you saw at the Lekgotla, that is being raised in an education kind of space. So for me, those kinds of things are good that we are seeing. And issues like infrastructure and those things will have to be improved. We know that schools supposedly have connectivity in their schools, but it's this trickle feed that generally just goes to an admin block. And so those kinds of things will have to be looked at in terms of making it accessible to everybody, and not just people in the cities, but also people in all the different rural areas. And so these are big questions, and I think they do need to be asked. But and I think that in the long term, these will have to be addressed if we're saying we're making it equitable and fair for everybody. I don't know if anybody else wants to say anything along this question, or if we should move on. Does anybody want to close? Graham, did you want to say something?
Yeah, just to say really that I think that the role of the school will change dramatically. I don't think that the schools will be where you necessarily go for an academic education. I think a lot of people, families, will realize that actually their children can get a better academic education in another way. Sugata Mitra's proved this in India with his research there. And so the role of the school will be for socializing, for doing creative, teaching creative subjects, that sort of thing. But the academic education, really, the COVID taught us this. I saw in my pupils quite a number of them, probably 30% of them, their grades went up during lockdown, and they actually attained far better grades than I would have predicted, because they were using the tools for independent study. And so a lot more of that will take place. And therefore, if children don't go to school for an academic education, will they still go for something else? Well, that's really what the governments will need to do. They'll have to work out how to use their schools for social engineering rather than for an academic education, because they won't be needed for that. That's an absolute, nailed on certainty.
Yeah, that's true. So I'm going to then let's start looking at the third and the last question within this chat. So if we then look at South Africa's coding and robotics curriculum, is it keeping pace with global standards? And for me, this is an interesting question in terms of, well, we haven't even really started. The curriculum was only published last year, and we haven't actually officially begun it in any of our grades. So yes, schools are piloting it, schools are doing it if they've been doing it in the past, but actually the curriculum itself, we haven't actually started exploring at all. So for those of you who perhaps don't know, we have these 3 curricula. So we've got a foundation phase 1, an intermediate phase 1, and a senior phase 1. And within that, there are 3 main strands. There's coding and robotics and digital concepts. And all of it is based around how do we get children to think. So for me, the exciting thing with this curriculum are the 4 areas at the top where we're saying, how do we get children to communicate, to collaborate, to be creative, and to develop perseverance? Those are all skills that we've been speaking about tonight in terms of that we want our children to be able to do, and we want our children to be able to succeed in these because of the changing world. So for me, that's exciting. And that the whole curriculum is focused on problem solving. So when they're looking at coding, they looked at computational thinking skills like decomposition, pattern recognition, abstraction, and algorithm design. But for me, it's exciting to see the debugging, because that then talks to perseverance and to problem solving, that they've added that in as a skill as being important that children need to develop. And then looking at robotics from a design thinking point of view, and talking about inspiration and ideation and implementation, which are similar terms that you would find in the design thinking process. So getting children again to solve problems, and then looking at how do we use these tools responsibly and creating an awareness of these tools. So the digital concepts point of view is also important that it's been added. It's a tiny segment in most instances, but I think it's important that at least it's there and we're encouraging it within the space. And then looking at how do we develop logical and critical thinking, which then ties back to the top of the umbrella or of the house in terms of how do we get children to think, and the computational thinking ties in with the design thinking in terms of the pillars and how they've got these all meshed together. So if we think about the technologies within the space, in the draft curriculum, artificial intelligence was there within the senior phase. And there's a little bit of it in this senior phase 1 as well as other technologies like augmented reality and virtual reality. But the main focus of these curriculums are actually on coding and robotics. and developing those skills. And in some ways, perhaps the senior phase one doesn't meet all the criteria because it's still just looking at scratch base and we're not doing much in terms of other languages. And the question is, should we be? Do we need to be? And so those are the kinds of things that we're seeing within our curriculum. And that's just a quick overview. So I'm not sure, Graham, if you'd like to begin with this.
So I've been through this with a fine tooth comb. You know, I've probably read almost every word of it. I don't suppose many other people have done that. It's good. So it's a good curriculum. And I was part of a working party that wrote the national curriculum, computing curriculum, that is now statutory in the UK. And this is very similar. So it's certainly up to the standard of the UK national curriculum for coding and robotics. We actually do it slightly differently, but the content is very good. It's very appropriate, and it's exactly what you know, your school children and your students should be learning. It's not so much the curriculum. It's the pedagogy. It's the way the curriculum is taught. And with coding and robotics, the way to think of it is a bit like teaching science, biology, physics, chemistry. So you could teach biology, physics, and chemistry just purely and simply theoretically without any practical work. But that wouldn't be doing science. Just as if you teach coding and robotics without doing any practical work, you're not really teaching coding and robotics. You're just teaching the theory of it. You're not going to produce good engineers who've never touched a circuit or an electrical component. So that's the challenge, I think, for South Africa, is not the curriculum. The curriculum is good, but developing good resource materials for the teachers to help the teachers to teach it, because there's a big issue there with teachers who've not studied coding and robotics when they were school children, now having to teach it. And so that knowledge gap is enormous, and how you fill that with teacher training is a big question. And also, I mean, there are lots of resources for teaching this. I think look outside South Africa, because no point in reinventing the wheel and spending a lot of money getting people to produce textbooks, etc., when they already exist. And the thing is, because the curriculum is very similar to other curricula in other countries, the textbooks work just as well. I've written quite a number of textbooks that we use in the UK, and I know that they would work just as well with your national curriculum. But I think how you get the practical work into schools, I think Keke probably would have more to say on that than me, because that's her job. So I don't know. Over to Keke probably.
Keke, do you want to comment, or do you want to go to David first?
Well, I really want to hear from David first, and I'll comment last. Thank you, Karen.
Yeah, so like you, Graham, I have, funny enough, read the curricula, interested in them. I've read the intermediate phase one really well, because I've been doing the thing that you said not to do. I've been helping a UK-based publisher write a book plan for a textbook based on the grade 5 intermediate phase curriculum. So it is an interesting process to try to take the principles that I know from creative learning and from this process of learning through making, challenge-based learning, project-based learning, and not imagine that in a recall-based curriculum. But luckily, as I worked through, and if you look through the term-based lesson plans, the modules, it is very experiential and project-based. For the first few phases, so for those who don't know, the foundation phase, up to grade 3, 4,
Grade 3
can be done unplugged. And then we move into needing some technology. So also, as things roll out, we'll start to see that first wave having the lower cognitive load and being able to do it without having to use the technology, which can often be a barrier both from learning as well as from resourcing. And then when it comes to the technology used, we're using Scratch and Microbit, which I think often gets overlooked because they're just free and there. But that's like walking into the best prepared learning environment in the world. Those environments are designed, all the edges have been taken off. It's like making sure the floor is great, the chalkboards are good, the chalk works, the projector, everything just works once you get into that learning environment. And that is quite amazing through the power of open source that we can do that. And I'd like to give a specific example from a school, Ngqele School, Mtombo Village in Alice. We were there doing Code Club training, and they had no internet. And I was like, oh, well, I'll quickly get my hotspot to do the training. And I had no 4G. Like, there was nothing. But because there's no paywall, there's no login, there's no account, for Scratch, we have Code Club on a stick. And you can take a flash drive and plug it in and double click and install Scratch on a computer in the classroom. And then get the PDF. So we've got our lesson plans in PDF for the Code Club activities. And we opened up a PDF folder, opened a PDF, and had that computer running Scratch in that classroom. And the principal looked at this and said, how is this so simple? He was just astounded that it was so easy, because we have so many problems with technology. But actually, by taking this technology, which is open source, has been designed to be used everywhere. It's a gift from the world to the world. That's amazing to me. And that's something that we have. And we haven't chosen to try to make our own coding platform or try to make our own microprocessor board with which to learn. So in terms of the choice of the technology and the way we're using them, that's amazing. That teacher last week received the MEC's award in the Eastern Cape for overcoming obstacles in Code Club as the best example of innovation in Code Club, and received a bunch of hardware, which will help improve their journey, because that is a bit of a barrier, including like Raspberry Pi computers that could run offline AI and microbits and robots and all those other cool gadgets, as we like to call them in this country. But yeah, I think the curriculum has been worked on for a long time. As Graham says, it is good. It's not something to take issues with. For me, my first time I saw it, I was like, wow, it goes slowly. But there's not a lot of time in the year. You're working with classes. And the example I give when I'm helping my fellow Code Club leaders understand it is your extramural club, which is where we're used to doing coding, is like a soccer club. So when you do extramural soccer at a school, you can play a lot of soccer. How much soccer did you play in phys ed? Not a lot. And phys ed had multiple strands as its goal. We've got to do our nutrition. We've got to do physical training, and we get to play games a little bit. So the idea that in our classroom coding and robotics, it will be like phys ed, physical education. Extramurally, we can then have Code Club. We can focus on other focus areas. We might have schools that have different sporting codes. We might have schools that have different approaches to doing extramural computing activities like robotics. You've got the different leagues that exist in your sport robotics. And then, just like with soccer, you've got club. So there's often a place to go outside of that environment to get more stimulation. So the school doesn't have to do it all. And when you're the teacher who gets asked to do soccer, you often get given a whistle and a ball and say, I haven't played before. They're like, but you've got Tuesday afternoon, go do soccer. And the cool thing about these learning environments for coding is it's much the same to get going. We bring children to the code space. We've got one tutorial ahead of them, and they can have fun playing and enjoying making. And that's where the extramural happens. And when you've got soccer at your school, your phys ed lessons are more fun. So that's kind of what interests me, is how we can use our extramural spaces, our community growth to support the curriculum. And the curriculum is good. We're just going to need to have skills understanding of how to use the tool and not fear of it to actually make it roll out. And then I think it provides a really great foundation. And remembering this curriculum isn't everything. The curriculum takes us up to grade 9. And then we go into when you used to have to choose to do computers. That's when you can go into your CAT and your IT and specialize. But the children who get to that level, all of our children in the country will then have had some exposure to computational thinking. They will have lifted the lid on the magical machine of their cell phone, of the computer, and seen that they'll understand these things. And that's what makes me very positive.
Yeah, and I must say I agree with you. And I too have read. In fact, I've read all 3 in lots of detail. And I think the progression just makes sense in terms of also assisting the teachers in the classrooms. If you think about it, it's only 1 lesson a week. It's not a lot of time. And if you think you've got 10 weeks in a term, that it's really not a lot. And when it's broken down and you see the bits, it makes sense in terms of how it's been put together. And so I think it's like you're saying, that's the teaching part, like the phys ed. I like that analogy a lot. And then you could still have your coding clubs and your other extension things to extend children who are more keen and want to play. So I think I agree. And Graham, I just say thank you to you for having read the curriculum and been able to make that comment. I think that's really, really cool in terms of it. And also being able to talk to it in terms of all your knowledge in terms of the British curriculum and working with that. So Keke, over to you.
I'm sitting here, I'm like, where do they come from? Are you sure David and Karen are from South Africa because they read through the curriculum? The only reason I'm saying that is because it shows the passion within this team from a South African perspective. I mean, Graham is just an exception. Because the educators that we deal with every single day don't even know section 2 of that document, what is expected of them. They do not read the CPF document. The 138 pages, they are very confused. So here's my take with regards to us meeting the global standards as far as the coding and robotics curriculum is concerned. Educators need to know how to approach the curriculum, let alone the document. There is so much information in there. If you're sitting and reading and you don't have prior experience, maybe having some digital concepts understanding, it's even difficult to understand the competences that the Department of Education requires. Now, Karen shows us a beautiful picture of a house that is explaining what this coding and robotics is. I mean, a house was not built in one day. And as you step into those little steps, as you enter to your house, you can see you need to develop the computational thinking and all of those to have the problem-solving skills. But then as you enter the door, it's digital skills. So meaning before I even get through to the window where we're seeing coding and robotics, I need to be a responsible digital citizen. Now I'm sitting and thinking, you even know the hours allocated. Most educators don't. So one, they would only attend trainings where they are going to be given the CPD points. There's been lots of organizations that are offering free support and a whole lot of information that is out there. But because it's not in their interest to mark off those points, they don't even bother. So for me, it could be that the policy needs to be enforced, that each and every educator maybe needs to be assessed on this specific topic of coding and robotics. So they need to go back and be assessed so that we can try and arose the Two, I think that the most important thing at this point in time when we're faced with this is that we need to keep on having these engagements and being able to debate about it, because David and Karen, you're definitely not from South Africa. Because you the only people I know that have read through the entire document. We don't like reading in South Africa. We want everything to be given to us. When I host these workshops and I bring educators and I say, let's read. Now let's read and find ways to approach this. Only then they will start noticing what we're talking about. And when you do say to them, there will be an assessment. only few will attend your session. With that being said, we are far from reaching the global standards as far as the approach to the curriculum, but it's a great curriculum.
So I just want to say thank you to everybody for putting in the input this evening and for sharing their ideas. I think we've explored a range of different topics across the board, and hopefully we've addressed the answers and given some thought in terms of to get people thinking around these things. We definitely don't know everything, but we're just willing to share how we feel and our passions and our points of view from where we're coming from. So as we end off, David and Graham, how would you like to end off your bits for this evening?
I mean, listening to KK talk there, Code Club is definitely my soul. I love code clubs and getting code clubs going. There is a SACE accredited course, 15 points. You can do it online. You can attend it to get your SACE points and get ready to run a code club, which I think is that great place to start playing and experimenting, whether it's with AI. There are AI pathways on the Raspberry Pi project site that is part of Code Club, or Scratch or Microbit or any other form of physical computing if you really want to go and raise the ceiling even higher. So I think that the thing is to start playing, find a code club, join a code club is the way I would do it. And AI is one of those forms of play. The things we've talked about tonight is many. And I think the other side is really to look at the fact that Karen and I are South African, and there are outstanding folks in South Africa doing great work to make this happen. I need to call out Ashrik Don, who's been making lesson plans with the department, sharing them out to individuals in the Department of Education in the Western Cape. And those will probably share and form the basis for shared lesson plans going forwards for other grades to say, you know, it takes us to do the work, but if we do the work, we can lead. There's a teacher who's made Mr. Roboto, Mr. Delport is his name, and there you can ask questions for how you could do coding and robotics lesson plans. And he's also South African, I'll have you know. And I think, you know, there are lots of fantastic people in this country, and we're going to do lots of things. There is a cycle. There are the early adopters, the early innovators, the early majority, the late majority, and the laggards. Let's not get put off by the laggards and the late majority. This is a really exciting field. And to those who probably in this call, you're really curious, you're here, you're in that early adopter space, we can really change the face of things. So I'm super excited about that. And yeah, our organization is here to help with Code Club, and through that extending into Microbit and Scratch. We're in South Africa, that's what we do. All of our things that we do are free and won't be charged for. I'll point you to open source tools until you're older than me and Graham. You'll never exhaust the tooling out there, the resources, the content. There's so much to do, so much to learn. It's an exciting time. And AI can help us navigate that. I think that's interesting. In preparing for today's call, I wanted to know if I would be telling a fib saying that the Meta AI could help me do this. So I pulled out my phone and I asked it, tell me stuff about Scratch. Tell me things about Microbit. What would I do with a Microbit in a lesson? Well, could you give me the code? And it gave me the blocks. It told me what those blocks would be. It helped me think about how to do it. I could ask it those questions. So I think that's where it comes full circle, and it's there to support me and help me use it. Check out Experience AI if you want lesson plans to bring it to the classroom. Again, it's there, it's free, and people are paying to help train educators in it. So keep your eye out for free training courses in Experience AI. A lot of that work has already been done to help us along. And like Graham says, it's done in the whole world. It's shared with the whole world. Both of those things I've been talking about come from the UK and are both funded through the Raspberry Pi Foundation, which sits there to make a world where young people can achieve their full potential through computing and digital making, and working really hard to give it all away for free as fast as possible. So it's an exciting place to be in. Yeah, I think that's it for me. I'm really excited about this change in how we do things with AI. So it won't be yeah, I don't know. It won't be all easy, but it makes things better. Yeah, great.
Great.
Yeah, so the one thing I would say is look up Sugata Mitra. Sugata Mitra, Professor Sugata Mitra, have a look at his work. It is fascinating. And he believes that that our schools have got it wrong. And I think he's right. And I think that schools need to adapt to a world that's changed out of all recognition to the way, schools have been run for hundreds of years with very little change. It's a fascinating bit of research. It's incredibly entertaining, and you can just look it up on YouTube and see videos of his work. So Sugata Mitra, that's my finishing remark.
So from my point of view, I think getting teachers to be excited about the professional development training is my passion. And I think that if we change a teacher, we change all the learners they ever come into contact with. And so that's been my passion for years now. And so I too have a range of SACE endorsed courses, from coding and robotics through to the robotics one alone is 15 points. Then there's the coding, which is 10, and so forth, and a range of AI ones. On top of that, it's just saying, how do we change the way we think? How do we use these free resources? How do we use resources that are around us? And how do we as teachers just begin to talk teaching up? How do we empower ourselves? We're in the classroom. We're in front of the teachers. We should be proud of that as teachers. I'm very proud to call myself a teacher. And so I think that's what we need to say is we control the narrative in our classrooms. We can get the children thinking differently just by who we are in our spaces. And so whether it's in the classroom or whether it's after school, it's saying, how do we make the difference in the lives of every child that we teach? So for me, I really think this AI I'm scared of it in some ways, but I also like it. And it's saying, how do we use it responsibly? How do we learn about it? How do we find the bits that are relevant to us and use it? So I don't develop tools like David does. I use the other side of the tools. And it's saying, how do we use these really effectively within our spaces? How do we find the low-hanging fruit to make and change the way we teach and get our children to be thinking differently? So Keke, over to you to end off this evening.
I would like to take this opportunity to say what a privilege to be joined by the Doctor of Education, Dr. Karen, our technology guru, Mr. David, and our catalyst, Mr. Graham. Today, I hope everybody has learned a lot because really these sessions is to give you information and to share the knowledge as much as possible. I have learned a lot today, and I really appreciate you for all our speakers to make the time to educate us on these wonderful topics. We will be hosting free teacher training starting in July to help unpack the curriculum with some of the educators around the country. So watch out for that. It will all be online. We are hoping to reach more educators. And David, just to bring again the debate for our next topic, Western Cape, it's another country in South Africa, because all the people that you've mentioned that are doing amazing things, the Western Cape Education Department is doing very well. so maybe the whatever that you're doing there, you should bring it here in Gauteng. We can't wait to adapt to the code clubs as well. So from everyone that joined and sacrificed their time, the educators, we thank you so much for all your time, and we do believe that we will keep on learning from these webinars. Thank you so much. That's me from United Siyafunda.
Thanks, everyone. We're going to end the session. Good night. Good night.
Good night.
Thanks all.